Perfect. The live streams are up. I see people are funneling in. I think we're going to give everybody another 30 seconds to a minute just to join in, and then we'll get started. I will go ahead and share my screen. And Richie, I think we're almost at that time.
All righty. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. We at the USAEL are so excited to kick off our Careers in Esports webinar series.
This is the first edition in our recurring series of webinars that aims to provide students, educators, and esports enthusiasts with a unique opportunity to explore a variety of jobs and career pathways in esports.
That's right. And every month we will be inviting and talking to tons of different esports veterans, such as professional players, coaches, tournament organizers, and a variety of others to give our listeners and students firsthand insights and expert advice on pursuing careers in the esports industry.
And our guest list is full of industry veterans stemming from companies that have established a significant presence in the space, such as the ones you can see on screen.
But let us first start with some introductions. So first, hello, I'm Rich Conti.
I'm Peter Poligolov.
And we are going to be your recurring hosts for this Careers in Esports webinar series. Do remember to post your questions in chat as we're going through so that we can answer them when we get to the Q&A portion towards the end.
Now, Rich, tell me, is there any better way to kick off our webinar series than with the guest we have today?
I definitely do not think that there is.
Would you do the honors then?
Absolutely. Without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce to our audience Jake Lyon from the Overwatch League. Jake, thank you for being here.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here. I think this is a great cause. Happy to be a part of it and happy to spread the knowledge around.
So excited to have you here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Jake's history in esports, we've added some highlights from his work experience. These include being recruited as a pro player and later coaching for the Houston Outlaws esports team, being selected to represent the United States as the team captain in the 2017 Overwatch World Cup, and currently working as an analyst for the Overwatch League.
Jake, you're definitely a busy guy. Don't know how you manage to do all this.
Yeah, I've had a lot of different roles in the Overwatch League and in esports, but I think that is sort of I think that's like the right way to approach esports in general. I think it sort of speaks to the depth of the industry, and maybe we'll talk about this as later as we get on, but how there's so much more opportunity than just what you might what meets the eye as far as playing professionally or coaching pro teams.
Absolutely. And I think we'd actually like to go back and explore what led to you pursuing your career in esports. I think it's a passion many of us share, a love for gaming.
Yeah, so our first question here is, how did you actually get into gaming, and what were some of the first games you played that really caught your competitive or even just casual interest?
I think way back in the day, I started playing on console games. So me and my brother, when we were kids, we would always play like just anything coming out. I mean, back in the day, we had the PS1 when I was really little, and then but mostly PS2, PS3. So playing a ton of classic games, like I'm thinking back to like Ratchet and Clank or Crash Bandicoot, those series. Later getting into like Battlefield and Call of Duty when I started playing more first-person shooter games. And then at a certain point, I think I started to want to play more seriously, got into PC gaming through Team Fortress 2. That was the first PC title I really got into. Actually, I'd played StarCraft 2 before that, but Team Fortress 2 was what really got me interested in like getting better and playing competitively. That's where I first started to compete. in UGC and ESEA leagues, playing 6v6 and 9v9 in Team Fortress 2. And I actually was able to reach a pretty high competitive level just without there wasn't really much of like what we call a professional scene, in the sense there wasn't like salaries to be made and sponsors to be had, at least by the time that I was playing at that level. And so I knew from that experience, like, okay, maybe I can actually be competitively successful in an esport. And then so when Blizzard announced Overwatch, I knew that was my shot really to be a pro player, since it had a lot of foundational similarities to Team Fortress 2. And yet it was from Blizzard, a dev that was clearly going to support it as an esport, was going to put money into it. And so I felt, okay, this is my chance to like be a professional player, to make a career out of my passion for gaming. And I went all in at that point.
That's awesome. And if I recall correctly, you did like TF2 competitions when you were pretty young. Was it like 14?
Yeah, I think probably I first started playing competitively when I was like 13 or 14 in Team Fortress 2, all the way through pretty much like end of high school. So probably like 17, 18. I was playing Team Fortress 2 competitively. And so I worked my way up through the leagues and the ranks to eventually play in ESEA Invite, which was at the time like the elite professional level of the game. But even I wasn't like one of the best players in Invite, but I still played at that division at least. I think we got 6th place or something in the season I played, out of like 10, something like that. So a respectable performance, but I always knew in that game, like it was a lot of fun and I really loved to compete in it, but there wasn't like at that point, I wasn't thinking about having a job playing video games. Like that was not even remotely on my mind. I just wanted to play. I wanted to be better and win games and play matches and play on teams. So I just did it for the love of the game completely.
Did you play any traditional sports before rotating over into esports?
I had tried a lot of sports when I was a kid. Like I think I played like a year or two of a lot of different sports. But ultimately I never really got into any of them as much as I was into competitive gaming. My parents were like, oh, having me try different sports. And I was, sure, I'll, tried lots of different stuff, but ultimately none of them really captured my competitive passion like gaming always had. Probably the most competitive thing I did for the longest is in high school. I was on the speech and debate team. So I traveled around California to compete in speech and debate competition.
Nice. I was actually on my debate team as well in high school. That's pretty awesome. So what were your parents' thoughts of you sort of getting into gaming so early?
Honestly, when I was younger, like my parents were really against gaming. They would let us play, but they viewed it as like the same as like sitting there and watching TV all day, that like it's not going to kill me, but it's like there's no value to it. That was their view on it, with that there's nothing positive or productive about this. It's essentially the same as sitting there passively watching any other entertainment form. And even though I was competing and I had a lot of friends and it was like a very social activity for me, I think my parents just didn't see that, partially because it was so new. I think they had no context in which to understand gaming as anything more than just another thing you could do on the television. And so they were really against it. They always tried to limit my gaming. I think I always ended up working out like a sort of, tacit agreement with them, which is that, okay, as long as I do well in school and I'm pursuing some extracurricular activity and I'm like on track to go to college, just tolerate the fact that I want to play so much video games. And that was kind of the eventual understanding that I think we came to as a family, is like they had to kind of accept, okay, he just wants to play video games, but I still had to, I had to make sure I was getting like, I think I was like a 3.5 in high school GPA, and have an extracurricular activity that I was like, committed to. And so that was like, I guess the agreement that we came to in our family that kept the peace as far as the war over how much video games I was going to play.
I think
Nice.
almost every single one of us that's ever been a teenager has probably had to go through a similar tacit agreement.
Mm-hmm.
But that actually segues pretty well into our next question: is how did you actually get recruited to turn pro?
So the beginning of my professional career was, after Overwatch had come out, I started to play on amateur teams, i.e. there's no sponsor. We're just playing together, make up a team name, make up a team, and then compete in tournaments together and try to win, usually winning money in tournaments, but only if you placed well. And so there's no salary, there's no backing. It's just prize pools only, essentially. And so I think that's a really crucial step as far as going pro, because pretty much everyone has to go through that. You're not going to be able to join for almost anyone a team that's going to pay you a salary unless you've already played at an amateur level, competitive with teams who are making money. And so I made a team with my friends from TF2. We called it Bird Noises, just to one of the name that was silly enough to be like very obvious that we weren't sponsored. And started competing in tournaments and having good results in North America, but still looking for sponsors. Eventually we found LG. That was like the first big break, I guess, for us to join a tier 1 esports organization, start making a salary, to give some consistency with the income. And at that point I was still in college. So I was still taking courses and getting my coursework done and trying to balance this like intense level of practicing and competing, trying to break through to the next level. As far as at that time, I think we started to hear about, okay, the Overwatch League is coming soon. And so we were all thinking, okay, it's all about being positioned well to be in the Overwatch League.
Now, you mentioned being in college at the time. If I can ask, what was your major and kind of what was your decision-making process in choosing that major?
So I was a double major in economics and philosophy in the time I went to school. It was after my freshman year. So the summer after my freshman year that Overwatch came out. So in my freshman year, I wasn't really seriously pursuing a professional career. Sophomore year, I was starting to do that. Or actually, no, it was the summer after my sophomore year, I should say, that I was starting to compete in Overwatch. That's when Overwatch came out. Then in my junior year, I actually took a reduced course load. So instead of 4 courses a semester, I was taking 3 courses a semester. And I also dropped one of my majors. I just accepted, okay, I just basically want to do the minimum to actually graduate with the degree. So I picked economics because I felt like it was a more employable major. But I still love philosophy, and I probably would have had a minor or something like that at the end if I had stayed to graduate. But after that third year of, basically just surviving my coursework, staying on course to graduate, but, being so busy with gaming that was like a big priority for me. Then after that third year, I was able to join the Houston Outlaws and play professionally. So I left school at that time with a pro contract in hand, which is something I kind of advise a lot of people to do. It's just like, you can keep doing school and be pursuing this, and then wait until you have an actual contract in hand to make a commitment that you're going to pursue it like full time and make sacrifices like, not going to school anymore.
So what adjustments did you have to make from, okay, I'm going to college, I'm also pursuing esports, to all of a sudden, this is my full-time job now?
Yeah, I think while I was in college, funnily enough, I think it made me like have to work harder as a student because I had to like get all my work done quickly and efficiently so that I had more time to practice. And in the past, I had been like, yeah, I'll get it done, but whatever. It'll just, I wasn't in a huge rush doing things very efficiently. So I became like a more diligent student just so I could get things done faster and then have more time to focus on the game and practice. It definitely was really hard at that time. That was probably the most difficult year. But then once I went pro, I was just very focused on continuing to succeed in the professional level, because as a pro player, there's a huge disparity between like a rookie player with no competition for your contract. You will probably make like league minimum salary. That's very normal. But if you're like one of the best players in the world, who's like very popular and the teams are competing for your contract, you might make 3 to 5 times more than you make as a no competition rookie. So there's a huge reward once you are a professional player to rising through the ranks and having better and better competitive results.
Thank you for those insights. We actually put together a little timeline of your career from information that was publicly available. So I'd just like to see, hey, does this look accurate? And could you kind of walk us through this timeline just a little bit?
Yeah, so I've talked about the beginning of the journey and the breakthrough before, and then to make it to LG Evil. I think probably getting picked for the World Cup roster was a big break for me personally. To have an individual showing that was really good. I think on that team, most people wouldn't have thought of me as like one of the stronger players, but I had a great performance on stage at BlizzCon that year. And so I think that opened a lot of competitive teams' eyes to me as a player, that I could compete, in a LAN event under pressure and still do really well. And so that's how it got me onto the Houston Outlaws. Play with the Outlaws for 2 seasons in the Overwatch League. In 2019, I wouldn't say it was a retirement. I just switched roles actually to be a caster. for the Overwatch League that year. And even another, I think, like important fact is that even between the 2 seasons I was playing in the Overwatch League between 2017 and 2018, I chose in the off season between those 2 seasons to cast for the 2018 World Cup rather than trying to play. And that got me some experience as a caster, basically riding off of my credentials as a known popular pro player, and, you know, showing that I could cast as well. You know, using that speech and debate background, I was confident, okay, I can do this too. And I think people really liked the casting, and I proved that like I can do it actually like to a professional standard. I'm not just somebody who plays the game. I can also do this other role too. And so in 2019, when I wanted to take a step back from competing, I was just a caster for the league that year instead. And so that was like, it was awesome to be able to switch from one role being a professional player. Sorry, hit the mic. To switch from one role as being a professional player to just casting and working on the talent side. And so I made all sorts of different connections, but I was also very cognizant of the fact that like that could be a future for me, even though I wanted to come back to competing later. And so in 2021, when I went back to the Houston Outlaws as a player and a coach, and then the next year I was just a full-time coach, I had like, now that's like my third role that I've done in the industry, from being a player to being a caster to being a coach. So I really like built a lot of different connections at different levels of the league, whether it's with other professional players, with team staff, and people in the league back office, with like the talent group in the league, everyone else like casters and talent who work the league. And then I was able to like, when I decided I wanted to, you know, I was living in Houston for 2021 and 2022. I decided I wanted to move back to California and step away from the competitive side, i.e. being on a pro team, even as a coach. And then I was able to become an analyst for the league because I knew all these people. I already had all those connections, and I was able to call them up and be like, hey, I want to make this move. Is there a spot for me on the talent team somewhere? And this year I've been a desk analyst, which was new for me, but also, you know, it's always this like sort of subtle difference between what I've done before, the experience I have. It's a little bit new, but I have enough proof of concept in my experience that people trust me that I can take on that new role and learn on the job.
I think this actually kind of segues pretty well into our next question, and you might have answered a part of it, but I think, Richie, this one's for you.
Yeah, that was a good segue. So, Jake, you mentioned both caster and analyst in that last segment. So in your own words, what is an analyst? Maybe compared to a caster? And then how would you say you found that transition moving into being an analyst?
Sure. So a caster is just somebody who talks live over the game. Like a shoutcaster is another term for it. Typically a caster, there will be a duo of casters over the match. Typically the roles are play-by-play and analysis, or play-by-play and color. Color is like another way of calling it. But so the play-by-play caster, exactly what you would think they do. They're telling you, okay, this is what's going on in the game. They're like live commenting like just the status of the game. This guy killed that guy, or this team's winning, that team's struggling. And then the color caster or the analyst is there to provide more detail, more color, more complexity, nuance to the discussion. What is allowing team A to beat team B? You know, what can we expect? Is there any adaptations you want to see out of team B? Which players are having particularly notable performances? You know, you coming in the downtime from the hot, intense moments of the play-by-play caster to, okay, in that downtime, you can add more depth and context for fans who often in esports are really hungry to know more and to really understand the competitive nature of the game. So I was a color caster and an analysis caster, which made it easy actually to transition to being an analyst, which just means basically instead of talking live over the game, I'm talking in between games. We come back to a desk where me and my co-host of the desk, we have, there's someone who's called the host who kind of runs the conversation, do what's called throws, where, you know, if there's an ad that has to come up, they'll say, hey, don't go anywhere. You know, we'll be here right after these messages. And the desk host will also lead the conversation with everyone else. And then the rest of the people on the desk are analysts who maybe have some sort of nuanced, deeper opinion on the game. And then, you know, so we have like that live conversation before matches. What do we expect to see from these teams? What's their recent history? And then after matches, what got this team the win? We go a little bit deeper. We interview players live on the show and talk with them. And so it just adds more fullness to the show. And also there's a practical element, which is that you can't really have a tournament. It's very hard to run a tournament where the games are just back to back to back. Usually you need a little bit of space between the games. And so having a desk to come to is like filling that space, providing better spot to put like sponsor reads and advertisements presented by the desk is just a lot more authentic and better quality typically than just sort of running a commercial break. Although you'll do both. So that's just like the overarching picture of esports talent, the caster roles and the desk roles.
Yeah, thank you for kind of highlighting the differences between the different roles. Now, between the different roles that you've had a chance to work in, what is your favorite and how does it compare between being a pro player as compared to being a color commentator or shoutcaster?
I will say where I'm at right now is feeling like I think casting, being an analysis caster for me has been the most fun role, because this year, although I'm a desk analyst, I still cast from time to time, coming in when people are sick or out, or sometimes they'll just have me cast a game, which I really relish because I think it gets me a little bit deeper into the game. I'm like, since I'm in a like very recent competitive player and recently coaching pro teams, I have like a really deep perspective on the game and like a up-to-date competitive understanding of the game. And so you can leverage that a little bit more in the analysis caster role. Whereas being a desk analyst, you have to move a little bit quicker. You have like a shorter period of time in which to make a point. You're sharing time with other analysts and having more of a full conversation, which has been really fun too. And I really love the people I work with on the Overwatch League desk. We've become like a family, and that's been really positive. But I think I really love the depth that you get as an analysis caster. For me, my days of being a professional player are behind me. I just don't want to do what's necessary anymore. I don't believe really that I'm like too old, or in general, I don't think people are typically going to be like so old. They like, oh, your reaction time is slow, so you can't play professionally. I think it's just that staying at the top as a professional player is beyond a full-time job. It requires a ton of sacrifice, and you need to play and practice a huge amount. There's a ton of study of the game, watching VODs of other teams, other players, constantly learning and staying on top is extremely difficult. And it's very hard to have like a balanced lifestyle when you're doing that. So for me, that like, I don't regret it. It was an amazing time in my life and gave me all these opportunities and an incredible career, but it's not right for me anymore with the actual like overall lifestyle I want to have that makes me happy. Being talent is like a lot more conducive to that, since I have a lot more of a balanced life and more freedom to like live how I please.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And to kind of take it back to the education component and to connect it a little bit to inspiring the next generation of esports professionals, what do you think students should focus on to pursue a career in esports?
Well, I think first off, anyone who's thinking about pursuing a career in esports probably has a big passion for gaming. That's probably just a given for anyone watching this, honestly. And so if you take that as a given, I think the best way to think about things is to think about what else you're passionate about that can connect with your passion of esports. And so for some people, the only thing they want to do is play professionally and play competitively and just be the best at the game. But for a lot of people, they might love playing the game, but they might, these are great. Like all the things you've got on the screen are great. Like they might have a passion for like computers and understanding how PCs work and building PCs and putting it all together. And they might be somebody who's really suited to work on the back end of like all these tournaments. We need servers. We need all like backstage behind the broadcast. There's tons and tons of IT support that we need to like have all the players be able to connect to the match, and we get all their player cams. It all comes from teams of IT folks. And so if you're interested in that and understanding those things really well, maybe you go down that route. If it's media, maybe you could either be in the broadcast in front of people like I am, or you could be on the back end. We have producers who help us like plan segments and plan what we'll discuss, who help us prepare. We've even got folks who just follow the stats of the game and help guide us as like, okay, these players have had statistically strong performances, or, I want an asset for this discussion we're going to have about this team. Well, let's look at different stats we could pull up and show the audience. And so there's people there on the back end just looking at the stats. I think one role a lot of people might not know about is something called an observer, which is that right in traditional sports, you've got camera operators all around the field, and they're all, you know, getting shots they're assigned to shoot different parts of the segment. And we have those too, actually, like on stage with the desk, we've got camera operators who like either operate what's called a jib, like a little crane that has a camera on it, or just, you know, tripod cameras, getting different shots of us that our director can cut between. But also there's people who are essentially virtual camera operators in the game, flying around their spectator cam in the game, getting these either cinematic shots for replays, getting highlight moments, or following the action live. That's very much, I think the people in that role typically are very into the game. They typically play the game the most of anyone except players and coaches, people on the competitive side. Almost all the observers are like really passionate about the game, because oftentimes like you're flying that camera with like a console controller or with like a keyboard and mouse, just the way anybody else flies a spectator camera if you're spectating a game. So that's another role that a lot of people probably would never know about. Obviously there's like the business, and there's like a whole giant corporation behind the Overwatch League, Activision-Blizzard. There's tons of different roles there, from people making the games themselves, like the artists and the creatives making Overwatch what it is, to the people deciding which games should we make, like what segments of the market are popular right now, what's the next genre of game we should be thinking about next. For the games we already have, what should we be focusing on? You know, where should the resources go? There's a whole like back end big strategic level there, and typically those people are also passionate about gaming as well. It's just that they apply that through this operational lens. And, you know, I think all the things you've got here are really great: marketing, software, events, legal, but those are just like a few different options to show. I think there's more careers than I could honestly think of and list here. I mean, there's tens, if not hundreds of different roles you could have that are still at some level in service of creating an esports broadcast product.
That's amazing. Yeah, that was a great answer. And I mean, you mentioned reaction time earlier. Those observers must have some pretty good reaction time in order to capture such a fast game like Overwatch, right?
Yeah, typically I think a lot of them are like reasonably high rated players, like not professional standard high rated players, but they're, you know, in the upper percentiles of the game, that they, at least they like it enough to play it all the time, because they need to understand, they need to anticipate what's going to happen next.
Right.
Which player should I watch next? You know, you need to have some level of understanding of the game to do that really well. And I think for the folks running those teams, they look for that. They want people who know the game, you know, very, very well. You don't have to be a competitive professional player, but you do need to love the game and know the game deeply, and want to sort of interact with it every day in order to highlight it as best as you can for the broadcast.
That game sense, that spidey sense, something's about to happen. Everyone has their ults. It's about to go down.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that I had is, do you have any thoughts for specifically students that are trying to approach the caster or analyst role? I know you may have approached it a bit atypically, coming from being such a high profile pro player, but let's say someone was directly headed for, I want to be a caster.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is like, yeah, like my role, my path was very atypical. I think that is like the most advantaged path, if you could do it, is like if you have notoriety in the community, if you're well known, whether it's as a streamer or as a pro player, as a coach, then people will like kind of look, they're more interested in respecting your opinion and hearing what you have to say. And so those things are really valuable. But I think the biggest thing I think for casting in particular, but for a lot of roles in general, is you don't get hired for the job because you can do it. You get hired for the job because you're already doing it. So if you want to be a caster, cast right now. Like, don't wait. Like you're not going to cast for the Overwatch League. They're not going to give you a paycheck. But you know, if you want to like make casts and put them up on YouTube or cast live on Twitch, you know, over the VODs of games, so you can get practice in. You can have like a deck of work that like, I can do this. I can actually, you know, perform in this role. And then, you know, looking for whether you could be partnering with content creators to do casts for maybe YouTube videos they're going to do, competitive tournaments, or like small community tournaments. You could be casting those, doing it oftentimes, honestly, for free. For a lot of these events, there's not really going to be any budget, if there's even like a prize pool for the tournament. But that's a great way to like get noticed and break into the scene. And from there, I think it is honestly, though, being a caster is kind of similar to being a pro player in the sense of it's extremely competitive. And so only the best casters are ever going to get hired, and there's not that many slots, frankly, at the top. So it's a very competitive role to pursue. I think, like, similar to being a player and a coach, there's just a lot of folks who want to do that, since it's a visible role, right? It's like that tends to be the roles that are most popular, is the ones that are most visible, where we actually see the people doing it. If you like watch the esport, you see the casters, you see me on the desk. So that makes those roles typically in higher demand, or in more, there's more competition for those roles. Whereas typically it's the roles you actually don't see that are just less known. People don't realize, oh, there's like a team of producers who are helping write these segments. There is like there's like people calling the show. There's people observing the game, right? Like, they must exist, but you never see them. And so I think for a lot of people, that invisibility means they don't consider that those careers might be a great fit for them. Some people I know who've started off as on-camera talent have transitioned to being producers, and working in the back and like assisting the folks who are on camera. And those roles actually have a lot of overlap in the skill set that makes you effective at them. But if you're willing to be behind the camera, you might find that it's like easier to get in, because it's just not as less people are aware of that role. So you might have an advantage there.
I think we're going to rotate over to our last question, and just a reminder to everybody watching, drop your questions in chat, drop your questions in the Q&A. We will have some time at the end where Jake will answer your questions. But Richie, up to you.
All right, so this next one we have is, why should schools today support their students' love for gaming?
That's a great question. I think there's a number of ways to approach this question in terms of reasons why they're in different categories. I think the most obvious thing to talk with people who don't know esports, who don't know gaming, and are just kind of seeing this phenomenon and are considering it, is just knowing that, like, there's a number of colleges that are giving scholarships for gaming. And so in that vein, if you just like treat it as any other sport, like Overwatch, you can get a you can get a scholarship to college to play Overwatch. You can get a scholarship to college to play football. Like, in the end, that's a really good reason to want to support it, is that you can send the kids in your K through 12 schools, can put them on a better track to getting into better colleges and getting scholarships, potentially defraying some of that high cost of attending college in the States. So that's like the number one reason. I think that's the most direct that anyone can understand, regardless of their knowledge of gaming. I do think, though, to go a little bit deeper, there is this very important, I think, even for folks who are never going to play professionally or aren't good enough to earn like a high dollar value scholarship, is there's so many soft skills you're building in esports and competition, the same way that a lot of folks who are never going to play professional football or basketball still get a lot out of being on sports teams when they're in school, which is they're building that camaraderie and teamwork, social connection between people. Those things are super, super valuable. I think everyone knows that these days, how important that sense of community is, especially for young people in school to succeed. And so I think any community activity that builds a foundation of that is worth supporting, is very valuable. And I think esports offers a unique way to connect people who might not normally connect, right? In sports, typically there's like a lot of separation along like differences in skill, differences in age, differences in gender. And esports, I think, can cut through a lot of that to where, it's a lot more free form. People can engage in different ways, can find what suits them. And so I think there's a potential for this like really open space where tons of different groups of people who might not normally mix at school can mix in a academic esports context.
It certainly seems like there's no shortage of reasons or benefits or opportunities speaking to why schools should support their students' love of gaming. Do you have any thoughts on how schools could possibly support their students' love of gaming?
It's interesting because for me in school, like the idea that like the school would have some sort of like structure around esports would have been absurd to me, like completely ridiculous. Gaming was something I had to like, school and gaming were separate, and there was nothing that connected them. And so they were often in contention with each other. And I do think that the idea that you can like build this infrastructure for kids to connect through the school, through the infrastructure that already exists and around their love and their passion for gaming, I feel like that's a huge opportunity. As far as how, it's just like having that team, or having that, whether it's like a computer lab or a space people can come and play games together, or a virtual space people can come and play games together, just a organized system that like, hey, we're all going to log in online when we get home from school and play together for a couple hours, right? Those types of things, I think that's really, really valuable, even without spending a dime from the school's perspective, right? You don't even need to like have all these assets. Like the kids who are already going to go home and game and play on their own, because as we know, like these days, the young people are playing video games like almost universally. Back in the day, it was like thought of as something that only boys do, but I think that's pretty much fully disabused of most people, that like everybody plays games. Different people are into different things, but having that, just even that shred of formality of like, hey, we're all going to get together and play this game together tonight, and maybe tomorrow night we'll play a different game. And I think that's it's a pretty light lift as a school administrator. Certainly lighter than like all the equipment and stuff you need to provide to have like most traditional sports or to run clubs like that. And so I think it'd be just having like a little bit of staff presence and a little bit of organization to get people together. I think a lot of communities and students can take that little bit and they can run with it. They can build those connections, friendships, and that social group that will continue to like build and grow from there. And I think that interest can become a snowball. It doesn't have to be something that the school is like orchestrating top to bottom, because in the end, the kids are really passionate about gaming. Or rather, if they are, then it should kind of roll along on its own, just as long as the school is cheering it on and enabling it. I think that's all that really needs to be done.
Oh my goodness. Are you looking at our notes, Jake? I love that. Specifically the part where you mentioned the kids are going to be doing this anyway, right? That's something that's one
the
of
most
our
important thing.
Big mottos here is they're going to be gaming anyway. We should help them do it in a safe, healthy, productive manner, right? Love that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jake, for sharing your insights and expertise. I know we're nearing the end of our webinar, so I think it's time we transition to our final section, and that is introducing Q&A with Jake. So I know we've been getting questions in chat, questions in Q&A, questions from the different live streams that we've had. So let's go ahead and take a couple of these.
I've got one here. In preparation of casting for OWWC and OWL, what were some of the ways that you practiced your casting?
So the best way to practice is just to cast offline. So with no audience, right? It was like me and my co-caster in the Overwatch World Cup with ZP. And so we would just pull up a VOD of like a competitive game, like even that had already happened in the past, but one that we hadn't seen before. We didn't know it was going to happen. And we just casted it. We're just together in a Discord call. And we're just, practicing our casting, practicing our transitions to one another. Important thing in casting is sort of sharing the air and having a sense for when the play-by-play caster should step in, when the color caster should step in. Sometimes you can have some subtle overlap, but like, how do you actually do that? And a lot of that practice comes from just talking, knowing each other, practicing together like that. And also knowing your co-caster well. I think it really is great to be friends and to like spend time with your co-caster outside of your work so that you know each other well and you have like a feeling for each other. Because a lot of it is very intuitive and intuition based. So I think just, practicing offline is very doable, right? It doesn't have to be, or maybe you can have an audience. You have somebody listen to you guys and give you feedback and tell you what they liked and didn't like, especially somebody who knows the game. That can be interesting, right? Can add more context to your practice. But it's easy to get reps in without having an audience or any stakes. Just as long as your co-caster is willing to do it. And you can even cast on your own. Like, I think that's very doable. You'll probably have to have some longer pauses in just to recover your voice, but that's totally okay. And if you're casting on your own, people understand that. You'll find the flow that works for you when you're doing it on your own. So in the end, it's just a matter of getting reps in with that before the sort of high stakes moment when, thousands of people are watching.
I got another question here for you. Do you think, or how may your career in esports be different if you had resources in school, or if you had an esports team at school, or if your school kind of supported your passion for gaming more?
Gosh, it's hard to even think about because of how separate my career, I always envisioned esports being from school. Honestly, I have no idea. Like, I think also part of it is the timing. Like if I had been like 5 to 10 years younger, maybe I would be in a very different world of esports, that it would have been much more successful by the time I was graduating high school and looking ahead to the future. Where for me, it was esports was blowing up in the years of me like starting to compete and play professionally. So I think honestly, it's hard to imagine. I think definitely though, more than my esports career being that different, I think my experience in school would have been a lot different, frankly, if it had been something I had done in the community at school. I feel like in high school, I was very much like on my own, doing my own thing, being kind of a loner. I mean, I had friends and we would hang out together, but since I just wanted to play video games so much, I didn't really want to pursue any like school sports that seriously. And so I think if there had been like an esports team in my school, I would have 100% been part of it. And I probably would have had like a stronger community at school because of that. So I don't know how it would have affected my esports career, but it definitely would have affected my school career. Yeah. And my experience of high school and college.
That makes a lot of sense. I got one more question for you here. If you should ever find yourself wanting to change jobs, would you say that you could transfer your analyst skills over to another industry?
To be honest, I think if I was going to like do a huge career change, I would probably go finish school first. I think that'd be the first step for me. Since I'm very close to graduating, I've just had like a stable career for the last 6-7 years since I left school, and it hasn't made sense to finish the college degree. But luckily I went to a school that the credits don't expire. And so I might still do that someday. So I think for me, honestly, that'd probably be the first step. But I think if I was going to change career, I mean, it depends. If I wanted to do something like completely, totally separate, then I don't think it would be very transferable. But I think the idea of me working for Activision-Blizzard, working on the development team, working in different roles in the industry, I think my experience would be very, very relevant. And that I'm known in the industry. I know things. Like I just have a feel for, I know the games, I know the community. If I was in a marketing position, I'd have a keen feel of like, what's authentic, what's going to play well in a marketing perspective. Where should we be putting the most of our resources? What types of events should we run? I'd be able to answer those questions in a way that adds value to a company because I just know so much about the scene. It's my passion and I've been doing it for so long. And so even though that's not currently what I do professionally, there's a lot of other roles I could transfer into. But it would just depend. If I wanted to go be a high school teacher, I'd probably, you got to go back to school and like finish some things, so it sort of just depends what type of role I'd be transitioning into. I do think there's a number of careers I could go into where my experience in like event production and everything would be really relevant.
I want to be respectful of your time. So I think we'll make time for 2 more questions. Rich, did you have anything?
One. Yeah, this one's a little bit of a silly one, Jake, but this is
Sure.
a game that me and my team would play back in college. Is if you had a team of 5 Jakes, like an Overwatch team, what would be your like specific character lineup, your favorite?
What would we play? Oh, that's a tough call. You mean in Overwatch or
Yeah.
I think for tank, it's got to be Junker Queen. I think that's like my favorite tank hero to play. Maybe the Sojourn and Genji comp, Junker Queen, Sojourn, Genji with like Lucio and Kiriko. I have to work on my Lucio. It's not looking too good these days, but I think the 5 Jakes could do okay in that comp.
Nice.
Maybe Soldier instead of Sojourn, more realistic.
That is a very aggressive comp. I like it.
Yeah. Fitting for a DPS player.
Okay, and the last question here for kind of those parents that are still a little bit on edge, what advice would you give to parents who cannot find the value in esports and their children pursuing esports?
It's a tough question because I think a huge part of it is as a parent is prioritization. Like, yeah, esports isn't like the first priority, just the same way that like at least for me when I was growing up, it was like academics was always the first priority. And I think there's definitely wisdom to that, but no person's life can be 100% of anything, especially kids, right? Like kids need these like different creative outlets. I think that's pretty uncontroversial. And so, whether it's the social aspect of esports, just having a group of friends for your kids that, they can connect with in real life and build social skills with, whether it's the idea of being on a team and being like a team player and learning those skills, the communication skills necessary to play team games and cooperate together, or just the enjoyment and sort of happiness that you get from doing what you love and following your passions. I feel like there's so many domains that something like, if your kid's passionate about gaming, that really, I feel like the value of esports is obvious. I think the value of gaming is more questionable, where you're like, my kid's just playing video games all day. What are they really getting out of that? Honestly, I see esports as kind of an answer to that, actually. Like, the more worried you are about gaming, you could fight your kid. I mean, good luck with that. It doesn't tend to go too well from my experience, right? You can go to war with your kid and like fight what they love to do, or you can direct it. And I feel like directing that passion is probably the more compelling route for most people, for your relationship with your kids, and for their happiness and their flourishing in life too. That, like, if they love to play video games, wouldn't you want them to do that in a collaborative way, in a creative way, in a way that develops more skills than just playing the game? Because I think, yes, it's fair to criticize the value of just playing video games all day, but I feel like it's kind of obvious how much potential there is when you take that passion for gaming and you apply it in a social lens, in a teamwork lens, or even in a career lens with esports. And I mean, I think people don't, maybe, honestly, I think probably a lot of people who don't, parents who don't, maybe they never really played video games, not really into it, or played it when they're kids and don't anymore. A lot of people don't know that, like, video games is the number one entertainment medium on the planet. Like, movies, books, TV, all added together, it's not as much, even summed, it's not as much as video games. Video games are dominating the global entertainment landscape. And entertainment is a massive industry, especially in the United States. And most of the Western world, there's a huge amount of money in entertainment. So there are careers to be had in this space. And if somebody has a passion for the games themselves, there's potential for them to develop that passion into sharing it with others, making an entertainment product for others, which there's jobs in that, right? There's careers in that. There's scholarships in that. And so I think those things, it's hard to imagine a parent who doesn't see the value in those things.
Very, very well said. Well, unfortunately, I think it's the end of our time together. Jake, just a huge thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to come here and talk to us, to talk to our students, to talk to our educators, and just share your expertise and your insights about the esports industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm happy to have been here, and I hope folks watching got some value out of this. And wish them the best.
Massive thank you.
And thank you to everybody that joined. All right.
Hope you have a good night.